TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. It's your friendly neighborhood philosopher here, D Wood, and I'm with your not so friendly neighborhood philosopher, Inspiring Philosophy. Super mean. It's weird. It's even weird seeing you smile because you normally have this like angry scowl on your face that you're enraged that this other person said something so stupid.
Well, as long as TikTok exists, I'll be angry.
So,
Be always mad.
oh yeah, that's been interesting because you've been now this isn't what we're discussing now, but you've been historically you made lots of videos. You've made videos on helping people understand passages of the Bible and so on. You've made lots of videos dealing with theology, with
Hmm.
atheist points and so on. But more recently, we've seen, especially on TikTok, you dealing with Islam a bit. So how's that been going?
Man, where do I feel like I don't know where to begin with that. I have learned that I am definitely not convinced of Islam.
You,
I
you're not
think
re-
it's
you're not going to recite the Shahada and fast for Ramadan?
no. I mean, I've dealt with like Jewish apologists, and they've given me serious arguments to consider. I've dealt with atheist apologists; they give me various arguments to consider. Other Christian denominations at times. Uh, I don't think I've ever been less convinced of a religion more than when I dealt with Islamic apologists. Like, wow, like they really are going to double down on Muhammad being in the Song of Solomon and polygamy being okay, even though we know it's harmful to women. But no, 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 we're just going to double down on all this stuff that's just demonstrably wrong. Like, yeah, totally have learned I am not convinced of Islam.
And you're again we're off topic right now, but while you're on here, this is it's interesting because apart from your videos that you occasionally share on you responding to other Muslims on various Muslims on TikTok. I'm not familiar with TikTok, but based on my limited exposure, it really looks like they're taking arguments that have been completely crushed and debunked on YouTube to where, yes, people will occasionally still use them, but they've decreased over time
Hmm.
in the amount that they're used. And the responses are readily available, just decisive refutations of incredibly stupid points. But it looks like they're recycling the same old arguments that have been completely destroyed on YouTube. They're going to TikTok where you have this younger audience who aren't familiar with the responses to these ridiculous claims, and then pushing them there on a younger audience. And then when you respond to them, they mass flag your stuff and get it taken down so that so that they can be the only ones who are talking to the young generation right now. It's very it's evil, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I've had a lot of videos been flagged that I've responded to Muslims. Typically, if I upload a video on anything on Islam, I expect it to get flagged. Lately, in the past month or so, it's actually been much better, but I wonder if TikTok like modify their algorithm. But like 2022, oh my gosh, probably just almost 90. I'd say about 90% of videos I uploaded with Islam were taken down for at least an hour at one point.
Mhm.
About 90% of them. Some of them were taken down for good, unfortunately.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I would love to see, platforms like TikTok get better and so on. But man, it's
Hmm.
historically all of them tend to get worse over time, and so that sucks. But anyway, we are
Yeah.
here on a not a terribly specific topic, but we want to talk about the problem of evil or the argument from evil and how our atheist friends and lots of Christians, because there are comments from Christians where Christians don't understand the argument anymore. It's basically people seem to be out of touch with what's happening at the philosophical level or the scholarly level. That arguments that have been, matter of fact, it's it's a parallel to what I just said about TikTok, right? People will go to TikTok using arguments that have already been refuted. But you have the same thing with, you have arguments that have been refuted in the halls of philosophy that even atheist philosophers acknowledge, okay, that argument is bad, it's weak, don't use that argument anymore. And yet it's still treated as like the go-to argument on online or on YouTube and so on. And so
Mm-hmm.
people were demonstrating in the comment section over and over and over again that they do not understand. They do not understand basically anything that's happened over the past 40 years. They don't understand what's been happening. So we're gonna fill people in anyway. Right here at the beginning, I'm just gonna this will take maybe 2 minutes or so, and then we'll pull up some comments and then we'll have a discussion about God and evil and where the argument stands and our perspectives on things. But it's just decided to go live with this because recently I posted a video. That video was titled How to Silence an Atheist. And I did this, the entire thing is a mockery of an atheist, a common atheist response to the fine-tuning argument. So just so everyone knows, we're in a universe, things like gravity, various forces of nature, and so on. They have to be pretty specific or we wouldn't be here. If a lot of these basic forces of nature were adjusted even slightly, we wouldn't be here. You couldn't have us. And so this is called fine tuning. It looks like whatever is making the universe made it so that life can exist there. Otherwise, we're just extremely, extremely, extremely lucky. But if there are limits to what you can describe as luck, then you start thinking, okay, what's going on here? And one of the responses is been put forward by cosmologists is perhaps we're actually, our universe is part of a multiverse. What if there's something that's been spitting out these universes for forever, and so there's like a possibly infinite number of alternative universes? Well, if something is cranking out an infinite array of universes, well, then if ours is the one that was just right for life so that life could form, well, it's more likely if you have an infinite number of universes that you would get one at least that's capable of life. So not so surprising. And all I did in my video was say, hey, if you guys are going to point to a multiverse to explain something in our universe, then I can do the same. So I'm going to say, whenever you guys bring up the problem of evil, why does God allow so much suffering and so on? When you guys bring that up, I'm just going to say, well, maybe there's a multiverse, and whatever you think a universe should be like, whatever hedonistic paradise of, just pleasure and dancing girls and whatever you think is the ideal world, maybe there's like billions of those kinds of universes out there, but that God focused on other stuff in our universe, like, like developing virtue or something like that. Maybe God focused on that in our universe. And therefore, yes, on balance, it's, mostly hedonistic paradises, but God had other things in mind in our universe. And so the entire video is a mockery of that approach, basically saying, hey, we'll just appeal to an infinite array of alternative universes to explain something in ours. And then, of course, you realize from the comments section, one, that the sort of fundamental problem is people don't understand what you're doing, right? It's like people don't, hey, I'm making fun of an argument, then I got all these responses. David, this is not an adequate response to the problem of evil. It's like, it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to show how stupid it is to appeal to an infinite array of undetectable universes to explain something, right? So that's and that's just, I don't know if that's cultural or what, but there are always people who like don't understand sarcasm and so on. I'll say something sarcastically and then they'll respond as if I'm serious. And then I have to like, dude, if you do not understand sarcasm, just please do not watch my videos. You're just going to get confused and not understand anything I'm saying.
Well, David, you're never sarcastic.
No, neither are you.
Never.
But that's a problem, right? If every time you're sarcastic, someone leaves a comment and goes, what? I don't understand how you could say that. And it's like, dude, just stop watching. Either learn what sarcasm is or stop watching my videos. But please do not keep watching them and not understand sarcasm. Anyway, so that's one problem. But then I noticed there are all these multiple problems that, one, they don't understand what the fine-tuning argument is. Two, they don't understand basics of probability or confirmation theory or anything like that. They don't understand when someone's just saying, "Hey, let me take your approach and flip it back on you and see how silly it is." They don't, but they also don't understand the problem of evil. What the argument is, what versions of it have officially, I mean, officially been refuted, so that at the level of philosophers, people don't defend certain versions of the argument anymore. They don't understand. They don't understand theistic responses to the problem of evil. They don't understand why we don't take their arguments seriously when they're giving them based on their own. How do I put this? When you're giving me an argument, if you're saying things that make no sense in light of the worldview you hold, I'm going to point that out. I'm going to point it out as a problem for you. So if you're making an argument against theism, but it makes no sense coming from someone with your worldview, it's like, guys, it's parallel. If an atheist says, "I don't believe in the resurrection because I don't believe in miracles," okay, that makes sense from the atheist worldview. If a Muslim says, "I don't believe in the resurrection because I don't believe in miracles," that makes no sense coming from the Muslim's worldview. As a Muslim, you're supposed to believe in miracles. Well, if you're an atheist, and I'm talking about atheist in the naturalistic sense, that you believe that the natural world is all that exists, there are certain claims you can make that make no sense. And when I hear you making them constantly, like, in other words, if you're appealing to objective moral values as part of your worldview, that makes no sense. I want to say stop right there, and we have to look at that. So anyway, they're just like it. I give us what I regard as a very simple argument. Hey, you've raised this as your response to this. Let me make fun of you if you use that response. And then the responses are, "Hey, we don't understand anything at any level of this argument." It's like, wait a minute, we got a problem here. You guys don't understand anything. And so we'll probably talk a bit about why that is as we're going. Anyway, I just wanted to set that up. And so there are all sorts of things we could focus on based on the misunderstandings of a simple point. But one that is pretty foundational is the argument from evil, or the problem of evil. So before we start looking into responses and so on, IP. So what is this problem that we're talking about here? Why is it called a problem of evil, or an argument from evil?
Well, I mean, there's various types of it. Basically, it's the idea: could evil exist with a all-loving, omnipotent, omniscient God? And generally, go back to like Epicurus, for example. He would have argued like, if there is a God, he's all-loving, or if there's a God, then he can't be all-powerful if he's all-loving, because if he was all-loving, he'd try to stop evil, or he could be all-powerful and not all-loving, because he could be able to stop evil, but he wouldn't, because he's not all-loving. But then he argues there's not an all-powerful, all-loving God. Modern philosophers have also brought in omniscience into that. So that's the traditional way you'd understand it. I mean, you can have either an all-loving God or an omnipotent God, but you can't have both. And that creates a problem for traditional Christianity, which says God is all-loving, omniscient, and omnipotent. And so then you get different problems. You get the logical problem of evil, which says that the existence of God is just logically incompatible. Or you get something like the evidential problem of evil, which is like based on the amount of suffering we see in the world, the intense suffering. I believe William Rowe uses instances of intense suffering. It's just unlikely there would be an all-loving, all-powerful God. So it's sort of like a probabilistic type argument. If there was an all-loving, omnipotent God, would there be the type of evil we see? And then they'll argue, well, no, based on things like the rape of Nanking, all the torture and murder that's happened, no, there wouldn't be. So that's basically the problem in a nutshell.
And that is that distinction you just made between a logical version of the argument and the probabilistic version is one of the things that people just don't seem to understand. Because I noticed in the comments, and we'll look at some examples, but tons of atheists and even theists who are saying what they think the atheist argument is, were using the logical argument from evil, right? So they're saying that there is a logical contradiction involved, and that's what the argument is. And guys, if that's what you think the argument is, that argument has been defeated for decades. Like, it's rare to see this kind of progress in the world of philosophy, where people will be arguing positions for centuries and so on, and never give up clinging to certain positions. But here, this is an instance where everyone who used to defend the logical version of the argument has also, oh, yeah, that's a bad argument. That argument doesn't work. So just so
Yeah,
everyone,
and
oh, go
to,
ahead.
to give some quotes, for example, Paul Draper in the Oxford Handbook of Philosophical Theology says, in order for a logical argument from evil to succeed, it is necessary to show that for some known fact about evil, it is logically impossible for God to have a good moral reason to permit that fact to obtain. This, however, is precisely what most philosophers nowadays, oops, I accidentally closed the quote, nowadays believe cannot be shown. So another one, William Rowe says, there is a fairly compelling argument for the view that the existence of evil is logically consistent with the existence of the theistic God. And so there are some people who still try to defend the logical problem of evil. I have seen some philosophers do it in today's days, but I think the majority of even atheistic philosophers agree that the logical problem of evil, it's pretty easy to address that with a type of defense. Like a free will defense, like Alvin Plantinga presented, different types of theodicies as well. And so you see atheist philosophers now gravitate more towards evidential problems of evil, or the problem of suffering, the problem of natural evil, these kinds of things.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, you just quoted Paul Draper and William Rowe. These are not theists. These are not Christians. William Rowe and Paul
No.
Draper are two. I mean, William Rowe's dead now, but they are the two of the leading defenders of the argument from evil from the past several decades. So these are guys who agree that there is a problem. They agree that there's a problem for theism. They are not theists. They are using evil as evidence against the existence of God, and yet they are acknowledging that whatever the problem is, it is not a logical problem. Just so everyone understands, because this is kind of foundational. This is one of the things that people in the comment section obviously weren't getting when I was looking through the comments. Is imagine two claims that I could make right now. Suppose I say that I have a time machine in my pocket. In my pocket, I have a time machine. It can send me through time. I'm hoping most of you would not believe me, right? But the reason you wouldn't believe me is not because there's a logical contradiction involved. It's not because it's logically impossible for me to have a time machine. You would just think it's really, 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 really unlikely that I have a time machine. You think it's massively improbable, and you would not accept my claim to have a time machine unless you saw some really, really good evidence for it. I would have to demonstrate it for you or take you along.
I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes you look younger now than you did 10 years ago. So.
Yeah, that's possible. I've heard that. So anyway, the idea there is I would be claiming something that seems really, really improbable, but not because it entails a logical contradiction. So that's one thing. If, on the other hand, I didn't say, oh, I have a time machine in my pocket. If I instead said, I have a square circle in my pocket. I've got a square circle. The only time you can make sense of that is someone's playing word games, because if you're actually claiming that you have a square circle, I mean, a square is a four-sided figure with four right angles. A circle is something that doesn't have any right angles. It doesn't make any sense. You can't have a square circle. They have contradictory properties. And therefore, it's not something where you say, no, it's improbable, but, I'd be open to evidence, David, like the time machine, right? So, okay, I don't believe you have a time machine, David, but show me and maybe I'll believe you. If I say I have a square circle, there's no, okay, you could give, what's your evidence? There's no evidence involved. It's something that cannot possibly exist. So when we're talking about arguments from evil, the question is, what's the connection between the evil we see around us in the world and the existence of God, belief in God? Well, a claim from a long time ago was that there's a logical contradiction involved. And so IP pointed out like the version of, Epicurus and so on. But there it's claimed, okay, if you have a being that is all powerful, that being would be able to do anything he wants about evil. 2, if he's omniscient, he would know how to stop evil and everything else. And 3, if he's perfectly good, he would want to stop all evil. And therefore, if you have a being with those three characteristics, there would be no evil, no suffering, and yet there is. And so that being can't exist. And the reason that was destroyed is people like Alvin Plantinga pointed out, we know of certain things that are good. We know of certain goods that you can't have unless you allow the possibility of evil. So, and the classic example that Plantinga used, suppose God values free will, and that free will is a good. But in order to have genuinely free will, God creates someone who then does something wrong, but God allows it because he gave the person free will. Is that even possible? Notice we're not saying you believe that or you think that's a good response or anything else. Is it possible? Is it possible for free will to be important and therefore that God allows someone to use free will for something bad? Is that even possible? If you say it's possible, bye-bye, there went, you just, the argument is no longer a logical argument. It's no longer a contradiction between saying God exists and evil exists. And
Yeah,
the reason,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
no. I was just summing up, and it's basically, in order for the logical version of the argument to work, you have to say it's logically impossible for God to have any reason whatsoever to allow evil. And the reason philosophers have now abandoned the logical argument from evil is no philosopher who's worth a grain of salt is going to say it's logically impossible for God to have a reason to allow any kind of evil. No one's going to say that. And so they all dropped it. They haven't dropped the argument from evil. They still use it. They just understand it's a probabilistic argument. And the claim is evil counts as some sort of evidence against the existence of God. How much or how little, that's going to be a matter of debate, but it's not a logical problem. So anyway, the point is that's what's happened at the level of philosophy. And that is completely correct. That is completely correct that there's a problem with that argument and people shouldn't be using it anymore. And yet I keep seeing people use the argument that's already been refuted, the way Muslims on TikTok are using arguments that have already been refuted. Then you have to go and refute them all again.
Yeah. One thing to note is that Alvin Plantinga's main argument was not to show that he has debunked the problem of evil. It was just to show that there is at least a possible world where you can have an omnipotent, all-loving God and evil still exists. Therefore, it's just, he's not offering a theodicy. He offered a defense. It was the free will defense against this. And again, it's like you said, it's just showing there's a possibility here. So God and evil could exist in the same reality, that multiverse, universe, you name it. It's not the idea that they could not exist together, like the existence of a married bachelor or a square circle.
Mm-hmm. So the problem's going to be evidential. Does everyone understand what we just said? As IP pointed out, Plantinga's not saying, hey, I've solved the problem of evil. It's, hey, I've shown you that there's no logical contradiction involved. So if you're going to say it's evidence, then bring forth your argument for that. But unless you're willing to say it's impossible that a good being could have any reason to allow evil, unless you're willing to say that and defend it and prove it, you got a problem. Because notice, I mean, this is officially an atheist's argument. If you're the one putting forward an argument, you are obliged to defend your argument. If you're saying that there's a contradiction involved here, you have to say what the contradiction is. And if you're going to defend the idea that it's a contradiction, you have to show that there are no other possibilities. There's no possibility of having God and evil. And then so someone like Plantinga steps up and says, what if God has a reason to allow evil? What if he says this is important and I'm going to do that, but that requires me to allow some possibility of evil? You have to say that's impossible. And philosophers are not going to say that's impossible. You might say, I don't like that or something like that, but they're not going to say it's impossible. And so we get to the issue that this is actually an evidential problem. Should we check out some of these comments, by the way?
Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look. And again, some of them are by atheists, some are by theists who are trying to defend the atheist position just for argument's sake, or say here's what they're really saying. But let's go ahead and look at a couple, and we'll get your thoughts. And we just so everyone knows where we're headed, I want to get IP's perspective on all of this. We do want to get to, okay, how do you actually address what is the best version of the argument, the evidential version of the argument? Like, in other words, as a theist and as a Christian, how do you reconcile your belief in God with the realization that there's a lot of suffering, human and animal suffering in the world of some very, very bad kinds. But let's go ahead and check out a couple comments so we can see what I'm talking about here. So here we have Joseph Mitchell. It says, first, you don't need the multiverse to counter fine tuning. In fact, I can't even remember hearing that argument before. I have no idea where you've been if you haven't heard this before. I've heard it like thousands of times. So I don't know what you're talking about there. Second,
Yeah.
adding the multiverse to the problem of evil makes it so much worse. Saying there's a multiverse means there's infinite evil. No, saying there's a multiverse. I mean, multiverse would just mean multiple universes, but even if you go with the infinite array of universes, that wouldn't mean that there's infinite evil because you don't need evil in all of them. But let's just say it would mean it could mean a lot of evil. But or you could say that our universe is the only one with evil. So no, that's not what that would mean. And then he says, and this see, Mike, this is where I catch on to stuff. Also, I actually prefer the problem of suffering, as it's more universal and includes creatures that have nothing to do with humans. That little comment there, I prefer argument for suffering for some reason that call it this, not that. That always like clues me in. Like you're dealing with it. This is starting to sound like a narcissist, right? I prefer calling it this, not that. It's like my pronouns are. It's like wait, what is your thinking? Why does your thinking dictate what I have to do? Like it's been called problem of evil for centuries. How do you get to come in and just say, call it problem of suffering? I actually agree that that is a better title, problem of suffering or something like that, because the relevant evil is the one that involves human and animal suffering. But why are you telling me what you prefer, as if that's supposed to affect all of us here? But anyway, so notice, ladies and gentlemen, everything that response just said was some sort of misunderstanding of something, and that seems to be a common feature of responses. Is it's just a series of misunderstandings of what the arguments are and what the responses mean and so on, and there doesn't seem to be much of an inclination to understand what people are saying so that you can respond accurately. Have you experienced that? It seems to be like epidemic levels of that to me.
Oh, today, yeah, especially on the internet. It just seems to be what people do. When he said that he's never heard anyone using multiverse, I mean, physicists like Martin Rees, Leonard Susskind, Steven Weinberg have all referred to the multiverse as an answer to fine tuning. So, like, if he's never heard it, I guess he just hasn't done a lot of research. Because
yeah, and I think what you could say is like, notice you pointed out physicists and cosmologists and so on who use it. They actually understand the probabilities involved and why they need some sort of alternative explanation other than, oh, we just got lucky. Whereas, online atheists don't necessarily understand the probabilities involved and why they need some explanation. So they just think, I could just say, well, we're obviously here, so the universe had to be like this because we're here. Guys, I'm not joking. That is the most common response I got. We're basically here, and therefore this is the way things turned out, and so you shouldn't think of it as improbable. And that's we'll probably get into some of why that's silly. Here, check this out. Ready? Hey, look at this. So IP. This is what I mean. So I come along and I say, hey, you guys are responding to the argument from fine tuning by appealing to the multiverse. Okay, well, now when you use an argument, I'll appeal to the multiverse. Ha, see how easy that was? And then you get the response like this. So your position boils down to, in this universe, your God thingy decided to torture us all just because he could. Nice. Yeah, that's a God with which I want to have a personal relationship. Smack in my head. Have you experienced this? Anything you say, it's, hey, let me misinterpret it in some insane fashion and tell you that's what you just said.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous way to deal with the whole theistic issue and the problem of suffering. For one, this can easily be addressed by just with an analogy. I mean, think about how many children have said this. My parents just want to torture me. They make me go to bed at a proper time and make me do my homework. They hate me. They just want to torture me. I mean, you got to think of it in that sort of regards. So just because God may allow things to happen to us we may not like, that doesn't mean he's torturing us for fun. It means he could be letting us go through growth, character development, developing virtues, learning triumph, virtues you can only get through suffering, like bravery, compassion, these kinds of things. So it's a weird argument when I hear atheists make this. Like, I mean, are they? It seems like it's coming more from emotion than actual like a logical understanding, which is fine. There is the emotional problem of evil, but you can't use that against logically. You can't argue against God's existence logically with an emotional problem with evil. So, just to say that God is torturing us, it really doesn't seem like they understand the whole relationship a parent would have with their kid, or a God would have with his creatures. It doesn't really logically follow that he's necessarily just torturing us.
Yeah, and the idea that that's what I was somehow saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
So notice your position boils down to God is torturing us just because he can. It's like, wait, what? When have I ever said or thought that in my entire life?
No, what I got from your video is that you were saying, look, if you could just appeal to a multiverse to explain away fine tuning, an undetectable, exorbitant amount of universe, or infinite, depending on how it's worded, then we can just do this with the problem of evils too, and then it gets us nowhere, right? Same thing with fine tuning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought that was a really simple point. This reminds me. I don't know if you ever watched it, but there was a Kathy Newman who interviewed Jordan Peterson a long, long time ago. And she was interviewing Jordan Peterson, and everything he would say something that was easy to understand. She would go, "So you're saying," and it would be like the most insane interpretation of what he had said. And she just kept doing it. And Jordan Peterson would go, "No, that's not what I'm saying at all." Right. But that's what I feel like. Like there's this generation of online Kathy Newmans who don't understand anything someone is saying. And yet they just, so what you're saying is, and it's like, what? Where are you getting this from? Anyway, it's weird stuff. Let's take a couple more comments to check out, see if we get to something relevant here. Op-Ed said, the multiverse is more of a theoretical astrophysics and philosophical concept than a proven phenomenon. True. Atheists, for the most part, understand that the universe we currently exist in is all that we are privy to. True. As a storytelling device, for movies and so on, it's mostly wishful thinking. Yeah, it's a good plot device, though, to bring in various versions of characters. But it's also a legitimate thought experiment. True. I grant all of this so far. For instance, according to you, I always get, as soon as I see according to you, here comes the trouble. A realm where evil doesn't exist, everyone lives forever, and winged humanoids play harp music on clouds isn't far-fetched. I guess that's supposed to be our view of heaven. We're playing harps on clouds. But an alternate reality where all your sons are perfectly healthy is out of the question. Here's where everything, like, wait a minute, you were making sense all the way through, and then you said, we believe that we're going to be playing harps on clouds. And then there's this claim, an alternate reality where all your sons are perfectly healthy is out of the question. So this is also a common feature of atheists, more so with Muslims. I have two of my sons are on life support, and they love to, what about that? Where's your God when there's that? So they're quick to do that. But notice, this is what I mean. As soon as according to you, it's never correct. It's never anything I'm actually saying. An alternate reality where all your sons are perfectly healthy is out of the question. What do you mean it's out of the question? Like, what are you talking about out of the question? I have no idea what you just said. You were making sense. And then as soon as you say, according to you, I have no clue what you're talking about. Kathy Newman.
Well, I mean, the answer to that is they will be healthy in this reality. It's called heaven and then the resurrection. It's not this idea that they're just supposed to be like that for eternity. Again, evil and suffering is a temporary aspect, and the Christian response is that it's temporary in order to build virtuous creatures that understand triumph, understand why evil and suffering is bad, and why we shouldn't create a universe like that. So it's creating mature, virtuous, intelligent creatures that have gone through suffering aspects and no longer experience it anymore because we have learned and matured from that.
Here's a quick, this is a plug for you. I loved your message in the latest, why hasn't Jesus returned yet? Can you say from where you have got inspiration for that clip?
Right, appreciate that, thank you. So, yeah, I just uploaded a video why Jesus hasn't returned yet. And it's supposed to be an impactful video. It's almost like a sermon.
So you're
Generally, I'm just
saying, so you're saying that Jesus hasn't returned because he wants to spend more time torturing us all here with atheists.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yes. The inspiration for that sort of comes from my post-millennialist convictions. I would say that the idea that I think that the future is not going to be Antichrist, 7-year tribulation. It's going to be the church age. The Great Commission will slowly but surely, gradually cover the whole world and be successful in making the world a better place. And that's when Jesus returns. And a lot of the inspiration comes from dealing with premillennialists and seeing how I think a lot of this stuff hinders the spread of the gospel, our development with Christ. I see a lot of Christians wishing Jesus would come back and just deal with all the evil in the world now so they don't have to deal with it through the Great Commission. They just want God to come down and fix all their problems for us instead of us going out and doing it as he called us to do. And so that's what I was trying to get across to a lot of the Christians in that video. And I highly encourage everyone to go watch it. I'm trying to teach more about the psychology of humanity, and I think there are important reasons in our psychology why Jesus hasn't returned yet, and so I go into that in the video.
All right, let's look at a couple more quick comments, and then we will get we will start getting our responses to the problem of evil. I think this one's from a theist because she says they say their objection. In regards to evil, their objection is a moral argument. That wouldn't change if multiverses exist. In regards to fine-tuning, ours is a probability argument, and the multiverse has probability implications. Just to be clear, galactic candy crumbs. No, as we pointed out, the logical version of the argument fails and has been recognized as failing by leading proponents of the argument from evil. They say this logical argument doesn't work anymore. And so the only argument from evil that is now on the table as part of rational discussion is a probabilistic or evidential argument. So if you didn't understand the point of the video, the idea of appealing to a multiverse as a response to fine-tuning is that, okay, ours have this feature, and those features are pretty puzzling given what we believe. How did it look like the universe has life as a goal as it's forming when there can't be a goal? So it looks like there must be something sort of guiding it. Good.
I just remembered I had a way to actually modify your argument that you made with the multiverse. Instead of appealing to an undetectable multiverse, you can just appeal to the universe itself, because we've detected, life permitting planets. They're in the Goldilocks zone around many stars just in our own galaxy. And we know there are billions of other galaxies. So you could just appeal to the billions of potential planets out there and say God created on all these worlds Adam and Eve scenarios, and we are just the only one where there was a fall. And so in that, it really would hinder the problem of the evidential problem of evil, because you have this giant vast universe and you only have like one or two or maybe a few planets where there was a fall and therefore evil. And so it would decrease the amount of evil that's actually in the universe. And then from that, you could say, well, there isn't really a lot of evil on the grand scale of this giant universe. And so, yes, there's not so much evil that it would be incompatible with an all-loving, all-powerful God.
And you could say that maybe on these other hedonistic paradises, they actually get to see what's happening on our world as an example for them. Like, hey guys, look what's happening with these guys. Now, guys, just because I understand the people we're dealing with here, we are not claiming that. We are not claiming that that is the case. So no, well, I think that's a stupid response because I don't believe that blah, blah. I'm not saying that, guys. This is all so far. Now, keep in mind, we do want to actually present responses to the argument. Right now, we're making fun of something. This is making fun of something. So yes, you could say that about our universe, so that even in our universe, the amount of pain could be massively overshadowed by the worlds without pain, the worlds that have no pain. And if you're an atheist or even a theist and you're saying, but well, God shouldn't allow any of it. Now you're in the realm of the logical argument, which every serious person who investigates this has rejected that argument because it's flawed. So yeah, could definitely go in that route. I just like saying multiverse when I'm talking to people who appeal to the the multiverse. All right, one or two
Swing
quick
and a
points.
miss.
Swing and a miss, David. The problem of evil and its consequences in our universe require a sound philosophical solution applicable within our universe. Swing and a miss. Dude, if that's your understanding of my video, swing and a miss, buddy. That video, the video is not meant to give a what do you call it? A sound philosophical solution to the problem of
Yeah.
evil. It's to show what doesn't qualify as a sound philosophical solution to anything.
Right. And I'm pretty sure you did your dissertation on the problem of evil, right?
Yeah, I did my entire dissertation on Paul Draper's, well, not just Paul Draper's, actually William Rowe and Paul Draper. It's interesting. Rowe eventually abandoned even his evidential argument. So you had the original logical argument. Then William Rowe is the one who popularized the evidential or probabilistic version by the famous example was the deer in the woods, right? If you're defending this argument seriously, you have to say, okay, human beings are moral agents, and so yes, God could be punishing us for various things and so on. But what do you do with a deer that's running through the woods? It gets caught in a forest fire. It gets burned up. It sits there. It survives, and it sits there in pain for days before it ultimately dies. What's the point of that suffering? Is there a point? So he's pointing out an example of just pointless suffering. It's not like you suffer and you learn something from it. It's just completely pointless suffering that no one will ever see. No one was there to witness it. It can't play any role in developing compassion for human, beings or anything else. It can't have any positive role, but there was suffering. How do you explain that? And he concluded that this is all evidence against the existence of God. But the question is, how much evidence is it? And what's interesting is, maybe we'll talk about this when we're in a little bit. Rowe eventually came to reject that argument. He saw a problem with that argument. And guess what? There was a problem with that argument as well. And Draper is one of the people who pointed out the problem with that argument. So again, these are leading defenders of the argument from evil, abandoning even that version. And so they went in a Bayesian version where they give a Bayesian version of the argument. My dissertation was on the Bayesian version of the argument from evil. Point is, guys, the idea that, they don't believe in offering careful responses, you're not paying attention, because we have and we do. You're not listening.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we can always pull up more comments, but they're generally along the same lines. So what is your perspective? If I were an atheist or just some seeker or something like that, and I said, I get that there is no logical problem of evil. I understand that God could have reasons for allowing these things, but that doesn't really solve the problem, right? Yes, God knows way more than I do, so maybe he has reasons for allowing all this, but I don't see that. So it kind of looks like whatever caused us to be here doesn't care about us very much. It really looks like that. So it doesn't look like, it's not what I would think of as perfectly good or perfectly loving or something like that. So you're a Christian, so you do believe in God. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I think people, when they look at the logical or the evidential problem of evil, they're not taking the entire theistic worldview into consideration, and then they're just saying, okay, I experience evil or suffering now. Why would God allow it now? But there's a lot more to the theistic worldview that really shows that evil, suffering is compatible with an all-loving God. For one, evil and suffering is supposed to be very minute in the timeline of the Christian worldview. So you have it now, but then you have all eternity in heaven where we don't experience that. So if we're going on for eternity and you have this fraction of time where you have to experience suffering of like 70 or 80 years at the most, that's not really that bad. And so they need to take the account of afterlife. The other aspect you can take up is something that was brought up in a paper by Gabriel Citron in 2015, that the reality we experience now is more dreamlike. It's not the most fundamental aspect of reality. People, when we wake up, we're supposed to wake up to be closer to God, and it's a more fundamental reality than what we experience now. So even people who've had near-death experiences talk about waking up, and it's almost like leaving this life and going to the next one is almost like waking up from a dream. Now think of it like Inception. like the movie Inception. If I were to shoot you in Inception, David, I don't think you'd be pretty mad because you just wake up in this world. If I cause pain in a dream world, you sometimes wake up and you're like, oh, everything's fine. Like I've had dreams where like family members have died and I was distraught in the dream. I was losing my mind. It was crazy. Then I woke up and everything was fine.
Oh,
so imagine.
I definitely want you to, I want you to continue, but I wanted to give an example along those lines because I was just talking about this with my wife because she was talking about something like kids getting beaten or something like that when they're kids and stuff. And I said, I remember being locked up. We'd all talk about getting beaten as kids, but it was like, oh man, I got beat so bad this one time. And it was like this funny thing where we're all talking about getting beaten. Whereas when you're a kid, it's this total nightmare, right? Like, I'm getting beaten. It's the worst thing in the world. But later on, you're like, well, it's not that bad. Keep in mind, not saying that there aren't horrible versions of suffering out there, ladies and gentlemen. We're just talking about things can change your perspective over time when other things are involved. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, like, so if dying is like waking up from a dream, kind of, I'm not saying exactly is, but kind of like that, you're going to wake up to a more fundamental reality where all your loved ones who died are already there waiting for you. And a lot of things will be put into perspective when you think of that. But the main argument I use against the problem of evil, well, one of the main, I would say two, but I would give the first one here, is that when people bring up the problem of evil and suffering, there's an implicit premise in there that they're not really saying. And a lot of times they're assuming a utilitarian or consequentialist outlook as their normative ethics. And what they're basically saying is, if you're taking a utilitarian view, everything is good that causes pleasure or happiness or well-being. Everything is bad is something that causes suffering. So we want to create a world where the greatest number of people experience the greatest amount of pleasure. That's utilitarian. That's what good is. But suppose that's not what good is in God's mind. Suppose he's got a more deontic outlook or a virtue ethicist outlook. So God's goal is not to just always increase pleasure everywhere, all the time, and that's what good is. Suppose we've got a virtue ethicist outlook. God's goal is to increase virtue. Okay, so his goal is not to necessarily make us happy, feeling constant pleasure, but to make us virtuous creatures, loving creatures, patient creatures, kind creatures. Well, if we start off as free creatures that are not going to have our natures determined or our wills determined, then God has got to lead us into the direction of virtue through its various instances, guides, and sometimes suffering can be used to help get us there. For example, you can't really experience compassion unless people have gone through some suffering. You can't experience the virtue of bravery unless you were afraid of something. You have to be brave to overcome it. So suppose God's goal is to take free creatures and they freely choose to come to him, but he also, when they freely choose to come to him, they have to become virtuous. Well, suffering can be used to refine creatures to become more virtuous. So if the good is maximizing virtue and the good is not maximizing pleasure or physical pleasure even, then God has every right to create a universe where there is suffering, because suffering itself is not defined as necessarily bad. What would be the main bad thing would be vices. And so God is going to create a universe where over time, vices slowly are weeded out and limited and done away with, and more virtues increase. And that ultimately leads to even a deeper, richer understanding of happiness and pleasure versus just maybe the spoiled version of pleasure we have where it's just whatever I want and whatever I feel, and I never have to experience any suffering. So that's the way I would generally go with it. And there are some other arguments I can give as well against it.
There are actually a lot of important subpoints there. But just this idea that thinking that if God exists, like God's main purpose should be making life as pleasurable as possible and helping to avoid any sort of pain. That's a pretty recent development as far as things being popular. I mean, so Christians, go back, read your Bibles, think of someone like the Apostle Paul, any of the apostles really, but think of the Apostle Paul just because we have a lot of detail on stuff that he went through. But imagine the Apostle Paul, he believed in God, he believed in Jesus, he was rescued from bad situations by divine intervention a number of times. But think about his list when he goes through a list of the things he's gone through. So he was given He was given the 39 lashes 5 different times. That was the punishment you get if you were in trouble with the Jews. He was beaten with rods 3 times. That's the punishment you get from the Romans. He was shipwrecked multiple times. He says he was very often hungry, tired, thirsty, naked, everything else. He starts talking about the apostles that were basically the garbage of the world in how they were treated. Just imagine, it never seems to cross the apostle Paul's mind. Hey, wait a minute. If God is perfectly good and perfectly powerful and all knowing, then my goodness, why am I going through all this stuff? It doesn't cross his
Mm.
mind that God's job or purpose would be to keep him out of all these horrible situations. God sometimes does, and the apostle Paul is happy when it happens, but he's not thinking of God as someone whose job or purpose it would be to make life as pleasurable as possible for
Well,
for the
you
apostle Paul.
can
It doesn't cross his mind. Go ahead.
you can even go one step further because Jesus is God. Sorry, heretics, but the Trinity is true.
And Muslims.
So Jesus is God, and so if God is the good, well, God experiences a lot of suffering, especially when he was Jesus, for example. He experiences suffering also in that he is united to the church. And, when he talks to Paul on the road to Damascus, he says, "Why are you persecuting me?" So he has experienced the persecution the church is going through. God experiences sadness when we reject him or we choose a life of hardship. So God, it seems, has experienced suffering, emotional suffering, physical suffering in the life of Jesus. And if God is the good, he would everything within him or everything he experiences would not be what is bad, but he experiences suffering. But what God doesn't experience is vices, sin, because that is the ultimate bad. That is a rejection of God. So it seems implicit in the very nature of God that what is good is not maximizing pleasure, but maximizing virtue. Suffering itself is compatible with goodness itself if God can experience suffering. So what actually is bad in the universe is vices. What is good is maximizing virtue, maximizing good principles. Suffering itself can exist in both of those states. It doesn't really add to the goodness or the badness of the universe necessarily. And I use that last word at the end just to preempt any possible objections.
It's also interesting because now we're talking about all of history, that this widespread belief that, hey, if God exists, then God would be making life as comfortable as possible for us and making sure that we don't experience any pain. Um, it's interesting that you don't experience that. If you go back through history, you don't find that argument nearly as much as you do now, because people had different views about what's good and bad. But it's interesting because you mentioned Epicurus earlier, and he is our first official statement of the problem of evil, or of the argument from evil. And he's also he was a hedonist. Pleasure is the highest good, right? So the we finally get a version of the argument from evil from the guy who declares that pleasure is the highest good, right? That's where we
Mm-hmm.
that's where we come up. And guess what? Yes, if pleasure is the highest good and pain is the worst evil, you got a pretty knockdown argument against the existence of God. Because if you have a being that is perfectly good, well, that is a being that is going to be absolutely obsessed with making life as perfectly pleasurable as he can, and making life as pain-free as he can. And since he would be all powerful and all knowing, he would be able to completely eliminate pain and make life nothing but pleasure. That's what you would get if you say pleasure is the highest good and pain is the worst possible state of affairs. Most people down through history before our time haven't agreed to that. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
think that now, which is why this type of thinking is far more popular right now. But
Mm-hmm.
so notice, if you don't, and I forget who it was. It was one of the female philosophers who deal with this issue, but I can think of 3 of them right now. I'm not sure which one it was.
Is it
Uh,
Eleanor Stump?
I'm not sure if it was Stump or if it was Adams. It was either Adams or Stump. It was either Adam. Matter of fact, it was definitely Adams or Stump. But she said theists have never claimed that God is a pleasure maximizer. And that was a very simple point. So she says, yes, what atheists have with their version of the argument is an argument against a pleasure maximizer. Theists have never believed in one. So what exactly are you refuting here? With that said, there is plenty more to go into on this issue. I did want to address this comment real quick from Cole because it was tied to something I said earlier. Going back to William Rowe, he says, why did he reject the deer argument? It wasn't just the deer argument. So he used the deer as an example. Because if you say, why is this person suffering? You could say this person is going to develop virtues and so on. If you say, why is this deer suffering? The deer's not, especially if the deer's just dying, the deer's not developing any virtues or anything like that. So why is the deer suffering? Rowe specifically used that as an example because it's something where it doesn't look like there's any sort of good outcome to it. Like what? Okay, the deer's suffering. What's the point? The reason Rowe rejected it, it's not that he's rejecting that example. He could still use that example and say that's an example of apparently gratuitous evil. There seems to be no point to it. It's just why would God allow that? So in other words, he's saying, granting that God could allow evil for free will or for this or that, there seems to be no good possible outcome of that. It's just pointless suffering. He came to reject that version of the argument. So that version of the argument, because he eventually realized theists have a point with what's called skeptical theism. And so the goal after theists responded with skeptical theism was to try and reformulate the argument so that it doesn't include appeal to what, I'm not sure what to call it, but I'll call it the awareness assumption. So just to recap, you had the logical version of the argument from evil. Then Plantinga came out with the free will defense. And even atheist and agnostic philosophers said, okay, yeah, we can't say that this is logically impossible. We drop it. We drop the argument, even though people continue using it online. But then you came up with the evidential version, and the response to that is what's called skeptical theism, which basically says, if God exists, so figure out, you can take a piece of paper. You can take a piece of paper here. If you were to take a piece of paper, let me grab a marker and draw this marker's dying. 1 second. If you were to draw a circle, pretty bad circle, but if you were to draw this, let's say a circle, and let's suppose that this is everything, this circle represents everything that God would know. So this is all possible knowledge. This is what an omniscient being would know. How much of that do you know? How much of that knowledge do you have? And I mean, most people would be inclined to go, that much, even a like a narcissist might go, that much or something like that. The point is you're not going to say you know much of that. And so would God have all kinds of reasons for doing things that we're not aware of? Yes, God would have all kinds of reasons for doing things that we would not be aware of. Okay, so if your argument is going to include as a premise, either stated or unstated, if your argument's going to include an assumption that if God had reasons for allowing evil or suffering, we would be aware of them, because keep in mind, that was Rowe's argument back then. I can't think of any reason for God to allow this suffering for this deer. I can't think of a reason. Therefore, this is why it's a probabilistic argument. Therefore, there probably is no good reason. And therefore, God probably doesn't exist, at least with the attributes that theists are ascribing to him. So that was the argument. And after years of theists pointing out, you need to do something about this premise here where you're acting like if God had reasons, you would be aware of them. Because at the end of the day, whatever else you think, ladies and gentlemen, it is a false assumption to think that if God had reasons for doing something, that you would be aware of those reasons. And so the idea here, and then I'll flip it back to AP. I mean IP. I said AP because I IP AP
Always lie
IP
with
AP IP AP. AP was even in here. I don't know if he's still in there, but he's running his mouth because he's jealous because someone else is getting attention for once. But the idea here is, guys, if I say there is no rhinoceros in my room right now, if I make that claim, ladies and gentlemen, there is no rhinoceros. Let me be more. There is no fully grown adult rhinoceros in my room right now. Can I make that claim? Yes. Why would I make that claim? Well, if there were a rhinoceros in this room, I would be aware of it. I have really, really, really good reasons to think that if a rhinoceros were in this room, I would see it. Everything I know about a rhinoceros tells me if there were one in this room, I would know it. But I don't see one, therefore I conclude that there isn't one. Okay. Now, suppose I said there is no insect in this room right now. There is no insect in this room. You say, why do you claim that, David? I say, well, I look around and I don't see an insect. Therefore, there is none. Is that a good argument? No, because there are insects that are very, very tiny. There are insects that hide behind things. So it's not, in fact, there probably is somewhere in this room, an insect somewhere, an ant or something like an ant, a gnat, something. So the point is, it makes sense to say, if there were a rhinoceros in this room, I would be aware of it, and therefore there isn't one. It doesn't make sense to say, if there were an insect in this room, I would be aware of it, therefore there is none, because I don't see one, right? So the strength of the premise is based on what reason you have to think that you would be aware of something if it were real. Okay, so then take that understanding. Now the question is, if God had reasons for allowing a deer to suffer, what basis do you have for thinking that you would be aware of God's reasons? And the answer is you have none. You have no basis for thinking, unless you just want to say, well, God would definitely come and tell me. Then that would just become, what reason, if God doesn't tell you, what reason do you have for thinking that God would come and tell you? So anyway, the point there, ladies and gentlemen, is not, hey, there's no problem of evil, or there's no good argument from evil. That is not the point of that. The point is, if you're making an argument against the existence of God from the presence of human and animal suffering in our world, make your argument without that assumption. So make your argument without assuming that you would be aware of reasons if they existed. That's why he dropped that argument. So that was a long explanation, but that's why he dropped that argument. He agreed at the end, skeptical theism is a good response to his initial version of the probabilistic argument from evil. And so that didn't mean that he thought there was no problem. It just means he wanted to reformulate the argument so that it doesn't include the idea that if God had reasons for allowing things, we would have access to them. So he came up with a Bayesian version of the argument. Paul Draper came up with a bunch of different Bayesian versions of the argument, but these are arguments where, just so you know, because I understand people might not be familiar with the terms, but a Bayesian argument would be more along the lines of human and animal suffering would be far less surprising on the assumption that atheism is true than it would be on the assumption that theism is true. In other words, if you didn't know anything about the universe, you just pretend, for argument's sake, that you don't know what this universe is going to be like. You say, okay, if purely naturalistic forces created the universe, what would I expect it to be like? Versus if an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly good being created the universe, what would I expect it to be like? Pretend you don't know anything about the universe. Just figure out what you would expect from those two hypotheses. And then now look around and see all the suffering and evil you see around you. And then say, okay, which hypothesis does that fit better? And so a Bayesian argument is that fits the hypothesis of naturalism much better than it fits the hypothesis of theism. So that's an example of a Bayesian arguments are going to be variations of that. But that's kind of where things are at now in the world of philosophy. Back to you, IP. What thoughts do you have to further?
Philosophers have have gone further and developed theodicies as to why God would allow suffering. Like I mentioned with the whole maximizing virtue thing, but I remember talking with the philosopher Justin Mooney as well. And he got up an interesting point, like why is animal suffering in existence? And he said, okay, well, let's think about this more practically. If suffering was so intrinsically bad that life should never experience it, why don't we live that way? Why are humans not actively trying to end the existence of the rainforest? There is an immense amount of suffering that happens in the rainforest for all types of creatures. Yet humans, we fight to try to keep it in existence. We don't think these ecosystems like the rainforest should be wiped out. If we truly thought suffering was so bad that no life should exist to experience it, why don't we just nuke the planet? Because think of the countless generations that are going to come over the next 1,000, 2,000 years that's going to experience suffering. We should prevent those generations from being born now by releasing the nuclear arsenal and covering the planet. We'd wipe out all life, but we'd prevent an immense amount of suffering. And so what Mooney was pointing out to me, and I talk about this more in a video I did called The Problem of Suffering, a Christian Response. If anyone wants to check that out, it's still on my channel.
Don't forget. But give me the link. Give me the link to that, and yeah, I guarantee you, I will forget. So you, after we're done, remind me, and I will link to that.
I will give you that. Yeah. So his basically point was that we seem to implicitly agree that there's such intrinsic goodness in life itself that no amount of suffering, no amount of the intrinsic badness of suffering could ever outdo the intrinsic goodness of life. It's far greater in the way we live, the way we try to preserve species. We are implicitly agreeing with God that it's far better for life to exist, and immense amount of life to exist, regardless of the suffering experiences. No amount of suffering can ever undo the intrinsic goodness of life. It should still exist. And again, the evidence for that is in the fact of how we live on this planet, how we're trying to prevent species from going extinct, prevent ecosystems from going out. We don't think that, humans should be, people that argue against the death penalty, for example, they don't think life should just be ended just because of the immense suffering they may have caused. Now, there might be Christians that might debate that maybe there is some sort of sins they could cause that require that. But a lot of atheists I know argue against the death penalty on that basis. So it's just kind of like what Mooney and I were talking about in conversation, and again, I published it in the video, was basically pointing out that there's the intrinsic goodness of life always outshines the intrinsic badness of suffering. So right then and there, we seem this, from God's perspective, if he has that in mind, he'll create an immense amount of life throughout the universe, regardless of the suffering that it experiences, because no matter what suffering it experiences, the goodness of life will always outshine it.
And that is an important point, in that like lots of atheists, especially the ones, you're just saying that God has us here to torture us our entire lives and so on. The atheists who like, do you really believe that life is nothing but torture? If you do, you should believe that we should annihilate each other.
Exactly.
Do you really believe that you're like, I mean, notice, even if someone think about this. If you took that seriously, someone gets shot or something. Oh, we have to stop the pain. Let's chop his head off. That will stop the pain, right? You still think, no, we save this person. Even when someone gets cancer, you try and save the person, right? You try and heal the person. Hey, this person's going to have to go through chemotherapy or surgery or all sorts of things, but you still think, oh, this is all worth it. So at the end of the day, unless you're just some really weird just absolute hater of all life, in which case I don't know how you're still alive. You still believe that on balance, hey, it's good to be alive and it's good to be here and so on. So the question is, why, when you talk about God, you suddenly act like it's the worst possible existence anyone could ever come up with? The super chat here says, "You're my favorite Protestants." That's good. You both have
never said I was. Just to be clear, I've never said I was a Protestant. I've never said I was a Catholic. I never said I was Orthodox. I don't say that.
Too late. This guy said you're private. Protestant.
Well, I'm not saying if he's right or not.
Do you agree with the Pope on everything?
No comment.
Okay. All right. And me, I've always just considered myself a Christian, but since I'm not part of the Catholic Church, then people would like, if you had to put me in a category, I would probably be in the Protestant category. but I've never really cared tremendously.
Wait, he had a question. He had a question on his super chat.
Oh, what was it? Oh, yeah, we do. You missed it because you were trying to show how much you hate Protestants. Um, he says, "Does doubt ever still plague both of you in stress or under critical examination of your faith?"
Yeah, I think I still experience doubt to this day. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you can ever really shake doubt. I mean, sometimes I have like desires sometimes to just stop doing YouTube and just learn how to play the stock market and just not care about anything anymore. I mean, what's the whole point of all this? I mean, you can get kind of depressed. I get really depressed when I see somebody walk away from Christianity. I feel like I have failed as like a Christian apologist slash evangelist to sort of prevent that. And it does bother me inside. And so, sometimes I kind of get mad at God. I get mad at myself. But I mean, what keeps me in Christianity is not the status of my heart or emotions, because Jeremiah 17:9 says the heart is wicked and deceitful. Who can understand it? What keeps me in Christianity is I go back and I go, okay, let's go back to what we know. We know the arguments against the reliability of the New Testament are crap. We know the arguments against the reliability of the Gospels are crap. We've been through this time and time again. We know the arguments against the resurrection are crap. I've seen atheists, I've read atheists on this, and I'm utterly unconvinced that they have offered good explanation. So what keeps me in Christianity is knowing how strong the evidence for Christianity is. And once I know that Jesus really did die and rise from the dead, then I know that he truly does love us. He loves us as his own. He died for us, went to the cross for us. And that knowledge of his love is what keeps me going.
Yeah, and my response to that is, you said, "Does doubt ever still plague you?" No, I wouldn't say that doubt plagues me at all. I would say I still have doubts, but they're about specific things, like the big picture. No, I haven't. God exists. We're created in the image of God. Jesus is Lord. Jesus died. Jesus died for sins and rose from the dead. I don't doubt those anymore. Doubts would normally be about more specific things where like Christians can disagree, or how do you understand this passage, or how do you understand scripture on this, or something like that. Yeah, there, because I've changed my positions on a ton of things over the years. I've changed. Like you could go down the line. There are issues where I've been on every possible. At some point, I've been on every possible side of an issue over the years. So yeah, lots of doubts on specifics, not so much on the bigger issues. Leonardo here had a question. He said, "As a former agnostic, I used to think that theists and atheists arguments are just confusing to me. What is your response to my younger self?" You want to go first or second, IP?
Saying that theism and atheist arguments are just your response to your younger self. So is a response to his younger self or my younger self? Oh no, so his younger self.
His younger self. So he used to think that these arguments are all just confusing stuff.
Well, I mean, they can be very confusing at first when you start to look into them, but you need to take the time. I mean, physics can be very confusing to freshmen that just started their physics degree. It takes time for these things to figure out. When I first opened the editing software that I use, or many years ago, it looked like I was looking into the human brain. I didn't know what to do with this thing. How do I make a timeline? I remember looking at After Effects and going, wait a minute, how come I can't do anything? And it took me a while to realize I have to hit new composition before I can even do anything. So a lot of these stuff can be confusing at first. That's why it takes time to learn things and grow.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, some of the arguments are confusing. If you start talking about the ontological, this such and such version of the ontological argument and so on, or the contingency argument, some of these can be confusing. But I would say a lot of the basic arguments on either side can be pretty easy to understand. Like the argument from evil, that's not terribly difficult to understand. If God exists, the God of the sort that Christians believe in exists, why is there so much suffering in the world? That makes sense. That's not a silly or stupid point. But simultaneously, if naturalism is true, isn't it? I mean, would you really expect life? Would you expect consciousness? Would you expect a universe? Would you expect anything at all? Would you expect the universe to be finely tuned? Would you expect there to be this this abstract world of concepts that somehow seem to exist independent of us, like, moral rules or mathematical laws or laws of nature and so on. Would you expect? I mean, you take something simple like mathematics. We get mathematics and so on, or moral claims or logical laws. They seem to apply whether we like them or not. In other words, 2 + 2 is 4 is still true in the Andromeda galaxy, even if there's nothing alive there. So there's something like these concepts are, even abstract concepts, are true everywhere. Even if we're not there, even if we didn't exist, these would still be true. And yet they're concepts. They concepts exist in a mind. So it's almost like there's a mind somewhere that includes all these concepts and so on. Anyway, there's weird stuff going on like that. But basically, some of the basic arguments I think are pretty easy to understand. Universe comes into existence. Universe is finely tuned. Life, development of life seems way more complicated than what we can explain by just saying, it just happened to turn into life. The tricky parts would be, actually understanding what's required for life would require some study and so on. But I would say, anyone can understand, like, hey, I'm in a room right now. I look around at the room. How many things in this room did not obviously require a designer? The bookshelves? No, I actually built those with my son, so I know those had a designer. What about the books? No, someone obviously made those. This computer, this microphone, this laptop. All this stuff obviously required a creator, except, according to our atheist friends, what's the only thing in the room that didn't require a creator? Us, human beings, and we just happen to be the most complicated things in the entire universe that we're aware of. There's something wrong with that. So anyway, the point is, those kinds of things, the basic arguments on both sides, I think you can get them. Go ahead, IP. You had something?
No. You just froze for a second, so I wasn't sure if it was you or me. And
oh, sorry.
yeah,
I do not know. Here's Adam.
Very nice, generous super chat.
Yeah. I don't know what he's saying right here.
I kind of
do. Well, I don't know what his position is. Like, is he saying this as an atheist or as a Christian who just happens to? So he says, Dr. Wood, I bow my head with my mom at lunch. It makes me cringe to my core listening to her pray. I don't harbor any hate for her religion. I see it's a benefit to her. Do you ever cringe listening to someone pray? What would you say to someone who just can't understand the connection she has? Interesting question. Not a normal question I get.
Yeah.
In fact, first time I've ever gotten that one.
Yeah. Well, Adam, I think you understand that Christianity is a religion, but it's also more than that. It's about it's theosis. It's getting a chance to partake in the divine nature and experience God in a very loving way. The Bible compares us to the bride, and Jesus is the bridegroom. This is more of a love connection type thing. So it's very much, it's a very intimate connection. And prayer is also a form of worship. So let me quote C.S. Lewis here, because I saw your super chat earlier, and I remember this quote, so I went and got it. C.S. Lewis said, it is along these lines that I find it easiest to understand the Christian doctrine that heaven is a state in which angels now and men hereafter are perpetually employed in praising God. This does not mean, as it could so dismayedly suggest, that it is like being in church. For our services, both in their conduct and in our power to participate, are merely attempts at worship, never fully successful. To see what the doctrine really means, we must suppose ourselves to be in perfect love with God, drunk with it, drowned with it, dissolved by that delight which, far from remaining pent up within ourselves as incommunicable, hence hardly tolerable bliss, flows out of the in necessity and again effortless, imperfect expression. Our joy no more separable from the praise in which it liberates and utters itself than the brightness a mirror receives inseparable from the brightness it sheds. The Scottish Catechism says that man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. But we shall then know that these are the same thing. Fully to enjoy is to glorify. In commanding us to glorify him, God is inviting us to enjoy him. So when we pray to God, when we worship God, it's not this narcissistic being who's demanding praise. It's that God is all that is good. It is infinitely goodness, and he's entered into a very special relationship with his creature through the atoning sacrifice of Christ, that we can partake in this divine nature. So when God calls us to pray, when God calls us to worship, he's saying, I have something so amazing for you, and it is the basis of all goodness. It is everything that truly is worthy of praise, which is him. And so what I think is going on with your mother is she is experiencing some joy in that intimate, loving relationship that just passes beyond understanding. It is something that you would see in a spouse and their love for their spouse. There's this marriage union that just goes beyond all logic. I mean, like, why would you spend hundreds, thousands of dollars on an engagement ring? You should use that for a down payment. That's the practical way to handle this. But it's an expression of the love that's going to be happening in the marriage union. There's something beyond what we would call the practical way to handle these things, that we want to go into ways to express our love in ways of buying a diamond ring. And likewise, a lot of times when people pray to God or worship God, they want to experience that intimacy with God in the way you would experience it in a marriage. But with God, it is far more deep and meaningful. It's what the Christian message is.
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure what his position is. Like, are you a Christian who doesn't like other Christians praying, or you're just a Christian who's not as, you don't have the same connection that your mom has? Yeah, not sure what it is, but I'll just say this from whatever perspective you have. If you're having lunch with your mom and she's praying, you should be happy, because sounds like you've got a good mom. Right.
Also, people are asking where that quote is. I don't remember the exact place of it, but if I'll give David the link. On my channel, there's a video called "What is Heaven?" and the quote is in there with the source.
Yeah. So this is I don't know if anyone's been looking around at the world that we're in right now, but lots of messed up relationships. Marriages breaking up quite a bit, parents not being there for their kids. My overall thought is, if you're bothered by your mom's long prayers or something like that, there are a lot worse things you could be worried about, you could have to deal with in the world than. Again, it sounds like you've got a pretty good mom if you're having lunch with your mom and and she's praying. So those would be my thoughts. Could be much worse, my friend. Then we have dumb apostate prophets. Why do you only respond to weak arguments instead of dealing with big problems like the miracle of the descending leg? Notice how he always had the miracle of the descending leg. He's gonna have to do a video about the power of the descending leg. But yeah, see, notice no one can have a serious discussion about anything. AP has to jump in with his I don't know, just attention seeking. It's wild attention seeking. I'm scrolling through trying to find some of these other super chats so I don't miss them. But
Adam commented. He said he's an atheist and just loves his mom.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, again, Adam, things could be much worse than having a mom who prays. And I mean, really, if you're an atheist, I've talked about this in the past, where you have like angry atheists, and then you have just nicer, okay, I don't believe the same thing that these theists believe. And I pointed out that I was an atheist in like high school. And there were a few other atheists, but atheists back then, yeah, you had American Atheists, the group, and they were pretty hostile, but your average atheist did not seem to care what other people believed. It didn't matter. It's like, okay, if you believe in God and that helps you somehow, fine, that's cool. I don't need that, but if that helps you, that's fine. It was more recently when the new atheism came along that, no, we can't allow that. We can't. Oh my goodness, if people are praying, they're going to destroy science somehow, and so on. They became much more aggressive. But yeah, so my goodness, you should be happy for your mom. You should be happy you have a mom who is there for you and prays and so on, because you could have a mom who just totally abandoned you, and or a mom who's like, my son's an atheist, I can't stand that. You're dead to me.
Yeah, that'd be horrible.
All right, we should probably be given some final thoughts here.
Yeah, I would remind people that I did in my video on the problem of suffering, I developed something I call the law of triumph as an answer to suffering, which is I formulated as this: if and when a creature encounters suffering, a process can take over where the suffering will have no lasting damage for the creature and be turned entirely into a greater good if that creature so chooses to allow. And so what I argue in this is, building off Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine and, of course, Paul, it was this idea that God is imbued in the universe something called the law of triumph, that if you encounter suffering, it can be used to help create better virtues in you, which will create much longer lasting pleasure in the long run after you become a virtuous creature. So suffering is used as a way to refine you and to bring about a good ultimately. And so that is one of my main arguments against the problem of suffering, is that it's not a problem because God is using suffering through the law of triumph to bring about greater goods, greater virtues that would not have existed without suffering.
And here you've been busted. Scrooge Jones points out, says Michael has a podcast on his channel where he debates Catholics about Genesis, so he's definitely Protestant or Orthodox. Nice try.
No, I did a semi-debate with some guy, some Catholic, and we just debated about Genesis, but I never said I was a Protestant or anything in there.
Too late. You disagreed with a Catholic, therefore you have renounced the Pope. We have off topic. A Muslim friend of mine is saying the hadith referring to the killing of Abu Afak and Asma, also saying Isaiah 53 is about their prophet. I don't understand the connection between Isaiah 53. I don't know. Maybe these are two issues.
Isaiah 53 about Muhammad.
I know the story. I know the story. Yeah, I know the story of Abu Afak and Asma, and also, but I don't know why Isaiah 53. Muhammad was pierced for our transgressions.
Oh, that's worse. Oh man,
Muhammad was poisoned for our transgressions.
His aorta was cut for our transgression because he gave a false prophecy. Therefore, yeah, his aorta had to be cut.
There was another one I'm trying to get to, but there were tons of comments. This is interesting. Let me go ahead and give because guys, I've given like a tiny fraction of some concepts that are relevant for examining the argument from evil. My overall view is, if I accept the conclusion, it's weird. It's a situation where if I accept the conclusion, I don't even understand the argument, how the argument got here. That sounds weird, but so in other words, if the conclusion of the argument is God doesn't exist or something like that, I can't understand anything that's even relevant for having the argument. So you could take it in a broad sense, right? If we're sitting here giving arguments, there's a lot that's already required for us to even be in this process of giving arguments about this. And a lot of the things that are absolutely required for us to even have a discussion like this, for Christians and atheists and so on to have discussions like this, there's a lot of things that are required for this to happen. So one, you already need a universe. Well, that's the foundation of the cosmological argument. The universe needs to be finely tuned because we're creatures that require a place that is open to us being in it. So you need fine tuning. One, you need extremely complex biological complexity. So even before that, you need the right kind of chemistry in order to make up the parts that make us up. So those are all versions of design arguments. You need human consciousness, because it's not cats and dogs who are arguing about this. It's human beings arguing with each other. So you need consciousness that is somehow like ours, that's capable of this sort of thing. There's an argument from consciousness for the existence of God. You need all sorts of concepts that are involved, like moral rules, moral obligations, and so on, to have this kind of discussion. In other words, when an atheist, this is the problem, right? When an atheist tells me, if God existed, he would do this. If God existed, he would do this. What I'm hearing, and for all you atheists who are watching right now, when you say, if God existed, he would do this, what I'm hearing from you is there are moral obligations that would apply not just to human beings, but would even apply to God if God existed. You're saying that. You're saying that there are moral obligations that are so objective, they're objective in the sense that they would apply even to God. And two, you're saying that you have access to them, that you somehow have, that you, a person sitting in front of your computer, have access to these moral laws that would apply even to God. That means that they are absolutely transcendent. You regard them as transcendent. And I look back and I think, if you really took your worldview seriously, would you think that the thoughts that are popping into your head about right and wrong are things that would apply beyond your situation? Because keep in mind what you are. You're some sort of evolved creature. You don't have to say that you're a machine for propagating DNA, like Richard Dawkins said. You can believe that you're somehow more than that. But then at the end of the day, you're something in that ballpark. You're here because your ancestors did a better job finding food and finding a mate and using a spear against an enemy. That's how you got here. That's what you are. So how are you wired? You're wired to do things that involve your survival and reproduction. That's it. That's what you're for. That's what your cognitive faculties are for. That's what your body's for. Finding a mate, getting food, reproducing. And as such, any sort of, moral instincts you have are going to be geared towards that. If you took your worldview seriously, would you ever apply any of that to God and say, this is what God would have to do? No, you'd say it wouldn't make any sense to apply those kinds of things to God. The fact that you do take your moral reasoning and say that God would do this or that shows you have a pretty darn high assessment of your moral reasoning. And I look at that and I go, that makes no sense on your worldview to take your moral views this seriously. This only makes sense if there is this objective moral realm and you have access to it, in which case that doesn't make sense without God. And you can go down the line. We're having an argument about the existence of God. That only makes sense if you have a concept of God. Where'd you get your concept of God and so on? This gives you the ontological argument. If you're using even evidential versions of the argument from evil are requiring logical concepts and probabilistic reasoning and so on. All of everything that is required for us to have an argument presupposes the existence of God, or at least a designer in some of the instances. But the idea that you can say, we're having a discussion and everything that's required for us to even be having this discussion presupposes or assumes something that completely contradicts atheism. Therefore, the conclusion is atheism. Sounds freaking insane to me. That's my overall, that is my overall assessment, right? The idea that you're giving me an argument against the existence of God and everything that is involved in our discussion about this presupposes the existence of God. I just, okay, whatever else happens, I cannot accept the conclusion, because if I accept the conclusion, everything else that happened just didn't make sense. That's my thoughts. And Reincarnation Entertainment here said, so here, what is this? This is an argument.
I know how to answer this.
This is an argument.
I can answer this.
Okay, I'll read it and then you answer it. 1, God knows for certain he creates Adam. 2, if you say he chooses not to create Adam, that is A and not A. That is impossible given not A. I'm not sure what sort of symbol, like if that's probabilistic. I'm not sure.
Therefore, God must create Adam. He has no free will. Conclusion: Allah and Adonai are impossible.
If you say he chooses,
I don't know. He worded it kind of weird there. It's
partially standard notation, but partially not standard notation. So I'm trying to, like, how would I say that in words? Because with the slash there, it would be given that it's impossible, or on the assumption that it's impossible. So, or is he just saying, if you say he chooses, God knows for certain he creates Adam, so God has that knowledge. If you say he chooses not, then that would be A and not A. And I guess he's saying that would be impossible because it's a contradiction. Therefore, God must create Adam. Therefore, he has no free will. And the conclusion is that Allah and Yahweh are impossible. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So he's like, did God create Adam in that sense where, he has got no free will. His nature is determined. Well, there's a paper that Jordan Westling and Joshua Rasmussen wrote called a randomness-based theodicy for evolutionary evils. And they actually use evolution against the problem of suffering and evil. I cited in my video on the problem of suffering. But they say, suppose God determines everything that happens within the natural world. Then God is the ultimate source of each event within it. Ultimately, God planned and set into motion that which will inevitably produce that particular personal or psychological identity. Well, therefore, God would be responsible for evil. But they go on. Consequently, one only looks into one's biological ancestry as merely the path used to execute God's plan. Contrast this scenario, however, with an autonomous, indeterministic creation. Now the spontaneous interworking of creation make one's personal and or psychological identity much more dependent on the process of creation itself, such that one would not be who or what one is without the radically contingent outcome of those processes. Created things, therefore, play a moral significant role in shaping individuals if they are autonomous to some extent. This greater role enhances the significance of one's connections to the cosmos and its content. Okay, in a nutshell, what they're basically saying is God did not create Adam with a certain nature and therefore determine him. God allowed random processes to bring about creatures out of the universe that were not directly determined by God. Then God enters into creation, makes a covenant with Adam and says, hey, I put you in Eden, here's a garden, follow me and I will make you into a much better creature, theosis, this kind of stuff. But Adam sins, falls away. God does not determine Adam because he did not directly create Adam. He came about from the processes, evolutionary processes in the universe. Therefore, God is not directly the one who causes Adam's nature and therefore is not the one who directly causes Adam to sin. So again, the paper is a randomness-based theodicy for evolutionary evils.
This was an argument that God is impossible.
Yeah.
Based on the idea that God can't have free will.
I thought it was that I misunderstood it because I thought he was saying that Adam would have no free will in that kind of sense. Then I misunderstood it if that's the case. Good.
Yeah,
it seems like, kind of a weird thing to throw.
Yeah, it looks like, so he's saying God knows. So it looks like he's talking about the problem of divine foreknowledge. So if God knows he's going,
even worse.
I think that's worse too. But it's if God knows what he's going to do, then he has to do it. And if he has to do it, then he doesn't have free will. And therefore God is impossible because God wouldn't have free will.
What? It doesn't make sense then.
Yeah, it's weird. It's just you do end up with sort of puzzling situations when you talk about divine foreknowledge and so on. But given our lack of experience of what divine foreknowledge is like, it's hard to make good arguments based on it.
Yeah, God's foreknowledge does not determine him. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like, so if I know what I'm going to use my free will to do, therefore I'm not free.
Yeah. Doesn't follow at all.
Yeah, it's like if I built a time machine and I went back in time to observe myself when I'm about to do something, I would know, based on the fact that I remember what I actually did, I would know what I'm about to do. Therefore, I wouldn't be free in doing it. No, that sounds weird.
That's not how it works.
Yeah. Hey, you want to go on Michael Knowles? Is this an invitation? Who's Mango Peaches?
Well, Mango Peaches, if you work for Michael Knowles, yes, I'll come on. Please message me through my website, and I will.
Yeah, he matter of fact, he has been doing. I haven't watched them, but he has been doing interviews with like. I saw a title is something like interviewing an exorcist or something like that about experiences. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe he's doing a bunch of religious topics, but yes, Mango Peaches, Inspiring Philosophy would be an excellent guest. Have any of you looked into the metaphysics of the Trinity as expounded by Saint Maximus the Confessor, Saint Athanasius, Saint Basil, etc.?
Yeah. Yeah, I have.
Is that good stuff?
Well, we're looking. Oh yeah, Maximus the Confessor. It's going on about energy essence distinction, and then he's kind of hinting on the different formulations of the Trinity, like the Latin formulations versus the social formulations. I did a video, an interview on Reasons Answered apologetics. They do a lot. You know about them, David. You've been on there as well. We did a hangout back in February on solving the logical problem of the Trinity, and I do that using philosophy of mind, and it's something I'm still working on and developing. But check that interview out; you'll see more.
Rusco here says, thank you for strengthening my faith in Christ. I was a lukewarm Christian bombarded by the Dawa gangs on my feed. After looking into them, I found you through the late Nabil Qureshi. God bless. Well, that's cool. And by the way, Rusco, there's a lot more coming. People don't understand. Also, you atheist, I don't think you realize what's coming because I've had my eyes on you for quite some time. I've had my eyes on you atheists for quite some time. And for some reason, I was born with an ability to spot someone's weakness over time. And I have spotted your amazing central weakness that no one points out. So we're about to see this. I'm going to have a couple of responses to atheists, and yeah, I'm talking to you, AP. No, actually, this applies more to the new atheist, the angry. This applies more to the angry atheist. What's coming up? So, guys, be aware of it. You will know it's coming when you see a video titled something along the lines of "A Challenge to All Atheists." You're going to see something like that, and you can know. Check that out because it's going to be pretty funny. Stephanie Casey with the super chat. Al with the super chat. There was from Ellie down here. Scroll down to Ellie. Ellie's a cool guy. He just put in a giant super chat. But I actually know Ellie, go to various conferences and so on. And super nice guy. Everyone's always trying to pay. And then he'll sneak around and like pay for everyone to eat. Even if it's like 20 apologists there, he'll just pay for everyone. It's cool. And then Dominic just said, God bless you. Where's Ellie's comment? I want to see what he actually said. I guess I could read it right off the screen. Wait, we had Zara Berserk, ex-Shia truth seeker, pair character. Oh, that's a super sticker. Sorry about that. Right. Oh, here's an actual question. AP and the Dizzle. How would you bring a polytheist like me to Christianity? I believe in God, but I feel that he gives preferences and privileges to other people over me, so I have to find other gods to balance power. That's actually interesting. I'm always interested when someone says something I like haven't seen before, and this is an example. So believes in God, but God gives preferences and privileges to other people, and so he has to find other gods to balance the power. So I'm going to believe in these other gods as well in order to balance this all out.
Yeah, it seems like we need to remember what we're getting in Christianity. It's not power. It's not privileges. God shows favoritism to no one, as Paul said. It's about his atoning sacrifice and having a relationship and having communion with him, experiencing theosis, these kinds of things. If you mean by power, privileges, preferences, like maybe they have more abilities, maybe they have things you want, that's not what Christianity is about. It's not about gaining power or privileges. It's about gaining Christ and the relationship we have with him only. So the answer to that is to set aside the desires of the flesh, the desires of the world, and focus on the things that are holy, the things that are Christ. And this is about accepting that we are just one body. We are all part of the body of Christ. And all of us have different tasks, have different gifts in different areas, and we need to utilize them. So I would really want to know more about your psychology, what you think would be preferences, privileges, because that's not what Christianity is about. It's not about getting special favors from God. That is what a polytheistic pagan outlook is like. You trade things, gifts, sacrifices to the God to get things. And the biblical God is not like that.
Yeah, I'm with IP here in the sense that this seems to be more like a psychological issue, in that if you're thinking, God isn't giving me the same, things that he's given other people, so I'm going to go believe in some additional gods for those things. One, I don't think you're going to get them if those other gods aren't real, then you're not getting anything about them. But two, yeah, I don't think you should be thinking in terms of, what you're getting, like what privileges and things you're getting. So yeah, I would just encourage some more careful thought. It is an interesting way of thinking, and it's good you're being honest about it. But yeah, it's kind of a little bit strange to us. Ellie said, Dawkins complains about the laws of physics being broken by Jesus turning water into wine. But when Dawkins turned nothing into a fish and a fish into a human being, the laws of physics and logic and common sense were never broken. It's a good thing that it helps him and other atheists feel intellectually fulfilled. Love you and miss you, brother. Thank you, Ellie. I do have to, he's on to a kind of a, I would phrase this differently. I'm sure you've heard this IP. In fact, it's so common. I probably want to make a video titled this, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. You heard that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking of doing one.
Yeah. That seems to, matter of fact, if you want to each do one and we'll link them together, that could be fun. But as far as like, the Dawkins and the atheists and so on, they'll use that when they're talking about Christian beliefs. They'll say, if you're going to say God created the universe or God created this or Jesus rose from the dead, those are extraordinary claims. And that requires extraordinary evidence. What's your extraordinary evidence? And then any evidence you give, that's not extraordinary enough to convince me. But you think how many claims like the universe formed on its own without something to create it, or just happened to end up finely tuned without intelligence, or life formed on its own just by particles randomly interacting. Those are extraordinary. Consciousness came out of material, just straightforward material, and the moral laws from that and so on. These are all extraordinary claims. And for some reason, they suddenly drop their requirement for extraordinary evidence about those extraordinary claims. It's just inconsistent. If you're going to say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, guess what? Atheist, you make a lot of extraordinary claims. Let's see your extraordinary evidence. You don't have any. About the intrinsic goodness of life. Yeah, we got to wrap up because it's getting late. Mm-hmm. About the intrinsic goodness of life, how would you respond to antinatalism, IP?
Yeah, I would say that they don't live it out. They're not ending their own life. They're not actually going out and trying to end life. They're just saying we should stop reproducing. But they're also not trying to stop animals from reproducing. I mean, quite honestly, if you were to be really consistent in that and go with the extreme, is what I was saying, beyond what the typical antinatalist says, which is just that humans should just die out, you should first of all try to end all life. Because a lot of antinatalists are like, humans are just destructive of the planet. We need to protect life, and so humans should just die out because we're not good for the planet. But they're implicit in that. They sort of accept that there is some good life out there, just not human life. And again, they're not actually consistent with it. I think of my argument is that if we truly thought that the intrinsic badness of suffering was so bad that it outweighs the intrinsic goodness of life, we should actually nuke the planet itself and end all life, so all species, plant life even.
Yeah, and I have to say, if atheists took their claims seriously when they want to talk about God, it's basic. All of life is torture. It seems they would go in that direction, but they don't. And then when you actually flip it and say, "Wow, you guys just hate life," no, we love life. We love it. We cherish life. It's the only life we have. It's like, guys, make up your mind here. All right. Well, there were still several more super chats. I didn't get to all of them, but I want to respect IP here and not keep him here all night. But people, I have to say, people did make it rain. People did make. People did.
Some of your followers need to go follow me and start sending super chats in. Jeez.
Yeah. By the way, everyone, link to Mike's channel is in the description box. I'll add links to any videos he wants to share as well. You definitely want to check it out. You want to check it because IP, he covers a lot of different topics that most people don't address, and he has his own thoughts that a lot of other people haven't thought of. And so you definitely want to get his perspective on apologetics. So one of the channels everyone should be following. And since they made it rain, though, I did want to play this video of a stripper for everyone. So here's a video of a stripper since everyone made it rain. Here you go. Wow.
I didn't know it was coming, but I knew it was going to be great.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, IP. You know what, IP? We should get a couple people involved and like do some sort of weekly show and go through interesting issues that pop up.
And David and I will both be in Fort Worth, Texas on April 22nd debating Muslims.
Yeah, anyone in the area of Fort Worth, Texas, I'll probably have to post some sort of notification. Or if you're a jihadi who wants to kill us, that would be your opportunity.
This is why my wife said I can't be friends with you.
Oh yeah. Well, just tell her they're going to shoot me first, so you're going to hide behind me. All right. Well, anyway, guys, as I point out, there's obviously much more we can talk about when we're talking about the argument from evil, the problem of evil, because it is, at the end of the day, you don't want to minimize. There's a lot of messed up stuff. There are a lot of people who experience horrible things. Again, I have two of my 5 sons have a genetic muscle disease. It's terminal, so they've outlived everything that was. When they were born, they told us 50% chance that our first one, they said 50% chance that he'll see his first birthday, 30% chance that he'll see his second birthday. We've had 2 kids with that same disease. They're both in their teens, but it is rough. And we have spent a lot of time in children's hospitals because for the first several months, they're in at first they're in the neonatal intensive care unit, and after that they're in a children's hospital. But you see lots of stuff. Kids born blind, kids who are born with horrible diseases and so on. Kids in there who are getting cancer treatment and so on. Horrible stuff. Do not want to ever minimize that. But at the end of the day, I just can't accept the idea that it's all random and pointless, and not because of any feelings or anything like that. It's just I cannot understand human beings and our reasoning and everything else that goes on in the universe. I can't explain it if it's just particles in motion. Can't do it. All right. Thanks, IP. Again, guys, be sure to subscribe. Check out his channel, especially when he does live streams. Support him. Matter of fact, I'm going to add that as soon as we're done. I'm going to add a link to your Patreon. Guys, support the work this man is doing. And catch you all later.